From the great from the great German thinkers of the Enlightenment era includes the likes of Leibniz, Wolff, and Kant. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who was born in the year 1646 and passed away in the year 1716, is considered one of the most brilliant minds of the Enlightenment and is known as the founder of the German Enlightenment. He began his career as a legal administrator in Leipzig and spent time as a courtier in the various courts of Hanoverian princes and the court of St. Petersburg. A strange blend of scientist and spiritualist, he is credited with the discovery of calculus but couldn't support philosophy that relied solely on empirical evidence. Instead, he developed a theory of the universe that included a spiritual component. He insisted on the existence of God and his creation of the world using metaphysical building blocks he called monads. Greatly inspired by his work, the famous Enlightenment figure Christian Wolff, who was born in the year 1679 and passed away in the year 1754, studied and gained his master's degree in northern Germany. He worked for a time at the University of Halle, teaching mathematics and natural sciences. But his teachings and his insistence that reason alone could form the basis of ethics was unpopular amongst orthodox philosophers of the time. He was sent into exile by King Wilhelm of Prussia I, only to be invited back to Germany as a distinguished philosophy professor by his next in line, King Frederick II. He published a huge number of works, 29 volumes in German and 41 in Latin, and made a significant contribution to the Enlightenment in his logical approach to encyclopedism. Immanuel Kant, born in the year 1724, passing away in the year 1804, remains one of the most well-known Western philosophers of all time. Known as a skeptic philosopher, he built on David Hume's theories and attempted to reconcile rationalism and religious belief. He lived his whole life in Prussia following his university education and taught mathematics and natural sciences. He effectively restored the transcendental elements of philosophical thought and is considered by some to have helped to bring about the end of the Enlightenment. His key text, The Critique of Pure Reason, written in 1781, directly challenged other Enlightenment philosophers and argued that all human beings are born with innate experiences that inform their perspective on the world. He theorized that nothing can be known, only perceived through the senses and perspective of the individual, and as such, pure reason is an invalid approach to thought. Now, on to the next part of the Enlightenment, we shall discuss the role of religion. Some Enlightenment philosophers were openly against religion in all its forms. There were revolutionary atheists who saw all religion as delusion and encouraged an understanding of the world that was rational and scientific. Others felt that there was a place for religion in society, but that religious observance should be an optional extra and not a mandatory component of life. Those who held a more moderate attitude towards religion tended to be united in their dislike of the Roman Catholic Church, and alongside that, the role that it played in maintaining the power of various nobilities and monarchies. There were also those Enlightenment philosophers who remained committed to their religion even as they deconstructed its history and role in society. For these philosophers and thinkers, the Enlightenment was religious in origin because it stemmed from an intellectual curiosity of their own faith. The attitude towards religion during the Age of Enlightenment ranges from radical atheism to intellectually curious faith and everything in that spectrum that can be categorized. It's important to note that before the Enlightenment movement, most academics were theologians. The study of God was at the center of intellectual inquiry, and theology was considered the mother of sciences. Throughout the Middle Ages and even into the 18th century in some parts of Europe, all study of morals, psychology, law, justice, and epistemology were carried out as an extension of the study of God. This is similar to the traditional Muslim approach, which in many cases viewed ilmul kalam, or rational speculative theology, as the most noble of sciences because its subject matter was God, and there is nothing more noble than God. Also, in the classical metaphysical and philosophical worldview, there was a general hierarchy of sciences, with metaphysics and philosophy coming at the top, as these sought to understand the divine by studying contingent beings and deducing the existence of the divine through these. Then came the likes of natural sciences below them, as natural science was simply considered an extension of philosophy. However, by the Enlightenment era, there was a radical revolution in this hierarchy, where metaphysics and philosophy was, generally speaking, this mere kind of speculative thought was downgraded or downplayed at the very least, or at the very worst case was thrown out of the window completely, and natural sciences took a dominant role within society. Of course, the ancient Greeks posited that metaphysics was the most noble of sciences, and then by extension, religious thinkers of later eras, such as Christians and Muslims, would have considered theology as a project within the metaphysical discipline to study God as the most noble science. The issue that arises with throwing metaphysics out of the window is that natural sciences rely upon the framework and foundation that metaphysics lays out. And without the very basic assumptions given to us by classical metaphysics and philosophy, the scientific project doesn't work. However, at the same time, many medieval philosophers did make the mistake of overemphasizing sort of metaphysics and mere speculative thought, and they ignored the importance of the outside world and of scientific discovery and empirical observation. Thus, the balanced perspective, which can synthesize both these aspects and take into consideration the importance of both of these sciences, is that metaphysics provides the foundation off of which the natural sciences operates, whilst the natural sciences is the fruit and the tool of that metaphysics by which we understand the natural world. We cannot ignore one or the other because both are dealing with different realms of existence, and they are both equally important. The study of the natural world is important, and the study of the supernatural and the divine is also important. Metaphysics without science leads to insanity as it ignores the outside world, and science without metaphysics leads to tyranny as it has a very materialistic, ends justifying the means attitude, and ignores the soul or spirit of a society, and the soul or spirit or the foundation behind the sciences in the first place. Back to the point of religion in the Enlightenment era, Christians agreed that Christianity was a revealed religion, just like most other religions, especially the Abrahamic religions at this time. It's important to know that when we're saying the Abrahamic religions, of course the adherents of these respective religions would generally not consider each other as Abrahamic, because they would say that they have a monopoly over the teachings of Abraham. The Jews would say that they have a monopoly of the teachings of Abraham. The Christians would say that they have a monopoly over the teachings of Abraham because they follow Christ, and Christ was the sort of embodiment of the law of Moses, and Jews, by denying him, would have rejected that. And Muslims would say that both Christians and Jews do not have a monopoly on Abrahamic teachings, but rather Muslims do, because Abraham was a monotheist, and the teachings and religion of the Jews and the Christians have become corrupted, and the Muslims only have the true teachings of Abraham. However, as a general term, as a generalization, it's quite convenient of a term to use. It's a very convenient and easy term to use to describe all three religions. So, for the sake of convenience, I may use this term, but it might not necessarily be completely accurate, so just be aware of that. In essence, though, Christians would agree that Christ sacrificed himself for mankind in order to secure their salvation. This knowledge was revealed to the masses through the Bible, which is the literal word of God. The trouble was that Christians also agreed to the law of nature. You can see this kind of natural law theory in the likes of Thomas Aquinas. And a code of behavior defined by God that applied to all human beings, regardless of whether they were Christians or not. And this natural law was a duty that all human beings owed to the God that had created them, though obedience to natural law will not bring about their salvation. Only belief in the revelation could secure that. So, these two spheres, the study of God and the study of the sciences up to the 17th century, had been completely intertwined. Like I said, it's important to note that natural science was just considered an offshoot of philosophy and metaphysics. And that was because generally what was understood was metaphysics provided this kind of foundation off of which the natural sciences operated. However, referring only to the words of the Christian God via the Bible, academics found few answers to the larger questions they had about the nature of man and existence, so they turned to the works of the ancient Greeks. They painstakingly read, reread, and analyzed a small number of key texts. These theologian scholars borrowed so much from the work of Aristotle he became known simply as the philosopher. In fact, in Islamic theology and in Islamic terminology, Aristotle is known as Al-Muallim al-Awwal, the first teacher, because of his importance in philosophy. Like, as has been pointed out, of course, the Bible or the Quran or the Torah do not give explicit philosophical systems or principles or foundations. The ancient Greeks had developed these logical and philosophical principles, for example, in the science of logic or in the science of metaphysics. So, what Christians and Muslims did is they borrowed these projects and they refined them into a Christian context or an Islamic context or a Jewish context. As such, even though revelation was the basis for belief, the metaphysical project was used as an intellectual tool to support these beliefs and prove these beliefs and refute the objections of those who oppose them.